questions, or are we?
I think you picked that
Give us
up,
a-
that you have to, if I ask you a question or if Marietta asks you a question, we're going to be edited out of this eventually. So just incorporate it. So if I ask you or Marietta asks you
What did you
about-
do as a young man? You would
Yeah.
say, for fun, as a young man, for fun,
Okay.
excuse me.
That's okay, that's okay. So just state your name.
Hi, I'm Paul Vatcher. I was born
And
in,
let's start again, and you're gonna look at me.
okay.
Okay.
I'm Paul Vatcher, and I was born at Exeter Hospital. I lived in Hampton Falls for, well, since I was, my mother and father moved from Raymond and bought a piece of property on Salmon Road from Charlie Green, 10 acres. And Dad built a little 2-room house, and 4 people, my brother Roy and I lived in the 2 little rooms house. There was like a kitchen and a family room, and then there was the bedroom. And, we lived there until about 1942, when my dad put the addition on because my sister Carolyn came along, and we had to make the house bigger. And my dad worked for Applecrest. For Alton's, excuse me. Worked for Alton Orchards, and the Alton Orchards was a big enterprise in town, as was Applecrest. And then, of course, the Merrill Store was another business in town. Edgerly's had a farm market, and I was trying to think, there wasn't much else in town as far as, I think there was a furniture store that was owned by the Shaddocks. That was across the pond. And those were the major drivers of the economy, I think, in town. I had the family lived on that little 10 acres for a good number of years. I finally got married and left and worked for General Electric, and I've always loved Hampton Falls because you always do love where you were born and brought up. That's your history. We did a lot of good things, I think, when I was growing up. I enjoyed everything that we did. I was the oldest, so I was the one who, when my mother and dad had to go somewhere, I took care of my brothers and sisters. One thing that I remember very well in town, Sundays was family day. And we had relatives who came from Massachusetts, Lynn primarily. What happened on Sundays is Mother would make a big batch of beans or something, and would come all my cousins and grandmothers and grandfathers, and they would come to Hampton Falls and to visit on Sunday. And that was the big family day. It seemed like it happened almost every Sunday. There was always something going on. Why? Well, because the people from Massachusetts who lived in the so-called city, they wanted to come to Cow Hampshire. They wanted to come to Hampton Falls, and where all the action was, or whether it was the country. And that was the center of the family, was the Sunday things. And we did a lot of crazy things. I can remember what we used to like to enjoy. We'd bring the city bumpkins, my cousins and stuff, and we'd go over to play hide and go seek over to the sand dunes. And invariably what we would do if somebody didn't know what was really going on is we'd play tag or something, and if you know a farm, below the barn there's always a place where the cows, all of the fertilizer and stuff from the animals goes into a place where they used to use it to put it on the fields and grow the grass and stuff. But it was always really mushy, and it was always cow flaps and all of that kind of stuff. And invariably what we'd do is we'd get one of our city bumpkins, because you couldn't tell it was there. We'd get them to run across. We'd say, okay, tag me or something. And then they would go across that and get all covered, and then my mother and father and everybody be angry. Well, you should have known better. You shouldn't have let them do that. So we kind of like played tricks on them, what we called the city bumpkins. Thought the country folks were so dumb, but we really weren't. We were pretty sharp that way. I can remember we used to have an outhouse. Where I lived in Salmon Falls, in Salmon Road, we didn't have running water until about 1943, 44. I think my dad, there was a well in the field, but we had to dig a trench and bring the water up and then put a pump in and bring the water up. But anyway, we had an outhouse, which was about a good 100 to 150 feet from the house. It was in a little building. And I can remember in the middle of winter, when you had to go to the bathroom, many a times I'd be in my pajamas, barefooted, and run through the snow, and didn't think a thing of it. Go down and go to the bathroom in this little outhouse. It was a different time. You didn't think anything was, you know, out of the ordinary. It wasn't a trying thing. That's just the way it was. Like I said, we would come home and for supper time it was at 5 o'clock, and you better be there, eat your supper, because if you didn't, you probably would lose out. And mother and father never worried about the kids because they always knew where they were. They were the neighbors. We didn't have to worry about somebody bothering us or molesting us or anything. It just never occurred. Never thought in those days for those kinds of things to happen. It's a different world, obviously, today than it was back then.
Did you have some favorite meals as a young boy that your mother used to prepare?
When I was growing up, you almost enjoyed everything. The favorite thing we used to do once in a great while is we used to make ice cream. We made our own ice cream with the churn, and you'd get ice, and mother would make a batch of, I guess they make it up with eggs and milk and all that, and then we'd all help churn the thing until it finally got done, and there's nothing any better than that freshly made, loose, wasn't hard ice cream at that stage, and being able to clean the spoons off and the pans and stuff, and homemade ice cream. Nothing like it. It's better than anything I can ever remember. And I can remember the woman up the street, they used to have the Nobles. They used to make ice cream out of cream, and you could not eat more than one little dish of that ice cream because it was just so rich, it would fill you right up. I still think about it today, how good that ice cream was. And because most everything was made at home. I mean, the pies were made, you picked the blueberries, and mother made the blueberry pie, apple pie, peach pie, whatever. All of that stuff was homemade. You didn't buy stuff, you bought the ingredients in the store, but you didn't buy unheard of to go to a bakery and buy a pie or anything, because everything was made at home.
What do you remember from the war years?
Those are trying times. I remember my dad was supposedly different individuals, elderly, senior people in town, parents and stuff, were responsible for being like wardens and stuff. And I can remember there would be, I don't know how they were notified, but there would be like an air raid or something, a trial thing that they say, okay, we're going to now practice in case we get invaded. And my dad would get down to the end of the street and stop traffic. I can remember about everybody's at their lights in the front of their cars were blacked over so that the light wouldn't shine up, so in case enemy planes came over that they wouldn't see it. I can remember, like I say, we used to collect the milkweed and put it in bags and take it to school, and they used this stuff in life preservers for the war effort. And so that was something that we did. Everybody was involved. You couldn't buy, my mother and father, they were smokers, and they couldn't buy only one brand of cigarettes. It's called wing cigarettes. It's the only kind of cigarette that was sold to the public. All the cigarettes, all the candy, everything that went to the war effort, to the soldiers and stuff. Milky Ways, you couldn't buy a Milky Way. I mean, I all during the war, I wanted a Milky Way, but you couldn't get it because Milky Ways were made by Mars or whoever made them, and they were sent overseas. Gasoline was rationed. I mean, you had to have a certain sticker. You get so many, I've got booklets at home now that little things that when you went to buy gas, you had to give them coupons, and you could only get so much gas. Red meat was rationed. Sugar was rationed. You could only get so much of this and that. And you didn't suffer because of it. It was what needed to be done. I remember many of the women used to be bused to Navy Yard, and a lot of the women did the work that the men were doing before the war, and building the submarines and stuff at Portsmouth. I mean, my mom and dad belonged to the Civil Air Patrol, and they went to meetings and stuff. I can remember Route 1. When I was in the third grade. We heard this noise, and we all ran to the windows, and you'd see tanks, long lines of tanks, go by the common down there, down Route 1. They were just right on Route 1. Oh, you'd hear huge planes go over every day. Buying war bonds was a big thing. They used to make a big thing out of bring in 10 cents a week, and then you'd get a thing to put in your book, and eventually you'd get enough in the book, you'd be able to buy a war bond, and everybody would clap, and it was quite a thing to, you know, everybody. I can remember, Dad, you could not buy tires for your car. You couldn't buy, if you had to have a tire, you repaired it. In those days, they sold, it looked like cup things that you'd put inside your tire, if you had a hole in the tire, just to patch it so that you could keep the car on the road. So everything was a different time. We were worried about being invaded. I mean, there was, they had the big prison over in Portsmouth. I can remember when I was in high school, they had I think that prison was used primarily for sailors and stuff, for Marines that got into trouble with our own guys. And they had an escape there, and they locked the Hampton Academy High School down because they caught 5 or 6 guys who had escaped in Hampton Center. But that was after the war. When you saw planes go, I mean, you saw planes, and it was a common thing to see fighter aircraft go over, P-51s, B-17s, flying over high in the sky and stuff. It was everything was rationed.
Were most of the kids expected to work, and were you expected to help out with the family expenses at all, or?
No, not really. If you wanted, because money was tight, everybody had chores at home, but also you always had. I can remember on Saturday mornings, that was the time I went up to Chisholm or different places, the Creightons, and mowed their lawn, and I'd get 50 cents, or I think it was 50 cents, maybe $1. And so if you did 2 or 3 lawns, you might get $2 or $3 a week, and that was a lot of money for a kid back in those days. And I can remember I worked all summer long. When I was a kid, I'd always work during the summer to earn enough money so that I could buy my school clothes, because Mom and Dad couldn't afford to buy me too much in school clothes. And the big thing was for a day, save all my money, maybe $150. That was a lot of money. And we'd go buy all my school clothes, and I'd pay for it. And my mother would take me to Boston. We'd go down to Jordan Marsh or something in Boston to get my school clothes. The same thing would happen with my brothers and sisters, but usually what happened, they'd get the hand-me-downs. Always the younger ones always got the hand-me-downs, unfortunately. You used and utilized everything. Everything was utilized. You didn't waste anything. You grew a lot of your own vegetables. During the war, everybody had a garden. I mean, everything was canned. You did those Bell glass jars. My grandmother canned. My uncles and aunts, they all did canning. My mother did a lot of canning and stuff, and preserves.
Were you part of the Grange, Paul?
I never was part of the Grange. I belonged, like Christian Endeavor was the big thing in town. I enjoyed that. Everett Scruton. I was married by Everett Scruton. The Baptist Church was the center of a lot of activity in town. I can remember I used to have when I grew up a little bit, I used to have a lot of friends in Hampton, and they were Catholic friends. And for a long time, they could not participate in my Baptist activities because they were Catholic, and they couldn't come into the Catholic Church. So things have really changed when you think about it. I mean, things were restricted back then. This is not well known, but in Hampton was a dry town when I was growing up. You couldn't buy alcohol. A lot of towns were dry. If you wanted to bring alcohol in, you had to buy it somewhere else and bring it in. A lot of people, this is a sad time in history, but in Hampton, Jewish people could not buy property in Hampton Beach. They were excluded. How they did that, I don't know. I was growing up as a kid. But Jewish people could not. It's just the way it was. When I was growing up, the thing with the internment of the Japanese that wasn't at that time thought bad. That was a good thing. And yet, when you look back on it, what a tragedy. You know, things have changed. But at the time, everybody was so fearful. I mean, there was a fear factor about what was going on in the world. I mean, it was certainly a different time. No question about it. Those are good times, though. We had a lot of good things. People watched out for each other. People made things, did things. There was a lot of love. A lot of love.
Was there ever a sense of the haves and the have-nots in town?
That's an interesting question. I don't know. I as a kid, that didn't. I don't know if anybody. I don't know who the haves were back then. Though I did have some school chums that obviously had more, but we didn't. Nobody flaunted it. Nobody. Remember, they only had. If you had one car, you know. Nowadays, everybody has a car. Everybody has this and that. But materialistic things were not as important because there wasn't that much. First, you know, we didn't have TV. We listened to the radio. We used to like to sit and listen to, you know, Tom Mix and the Lone Ranger and the Shadow and all that stuff. And you'd sit around the radio and listen. I mean, from 7 to 9 o'clock at night, that was the big thing. When TV came out, it was only on for a few hours every day. And I remember I used to babysit a lot, my neighbors. One of the big things is I like to babysit one of the neighbors that had a TV. And I'd go on a Saturday night and I'd be able to watch TV and babysit at the same time. And I thought, they paid me for babysitting and watching TV? You gotta be kidding me, this is great. Used to watch the wrestling matches late at night. So, and get paid too. I mean, that was kind of neat. So TV was that was really unique when it first came out because it was black and white with the round screens. Some of them weren't very big. And things have changed a lot because of the electronic age, the things. My father, when he first, he was an electrical engineer, graduated from the University of New Hampshire in 1929. And he came in when the electronics were just starting. I mean, radio, TV were just starting, and crystals sets. And he was very inquisitive about those kinds of things because the world was, even back then, progressing so quickly. Things were changing so quickly. Transportation was changing so quickly. I used to ride and go to my grandparents in Lynn, get down to Hampton and get the Bud Liner, or the train would take me into Lynn. I mean, that was one way to go. And that was a wonderful trip to take the steam engine it would come from Portsmouth and go all the way into Boston. Route 1 was the main route between here and Boston. A lot of people are down, if you go down to Danvers, Massachusetts in those days, but you used to go up the hill, up the top of the hill, they had these huge, huge mirrors. And you look in you could see, there's 2 of them. And you go up the long hill, and you could see who was coming up the other side because they had 3 lanes. They had a passing lane in the middle, and obviously the passing lane could go either way. Well, they used to be able to pass whether you went up the hill or down the hill. And so, but you had to be able to see who was coming up the other way in passing so that you didn't pass. So they had these big mirrors that you look at. Oh, okay, somebody's coming up the other side. I better not pass now. So there's a lot of different things that George talked about. Brought back a lot of good memories. He's very knowledgeable on names and stuff, and he's a little older than I am. But his father and the Merrill store was certainly the center of the universe as far as Hampton Falls goes. And did a lot of walking. I can remember bicycles, and kids used bicycles. I can remember walking from my house to the Ioka Theater in Exeter with my mother to go see Bambi, Disney, in the dead of winter, because the car was not working at that time, so I wanted to go so badly, so she took me, and we walked this for 6 or 7 miles to get to Exeter to go to the movies and back. We had places, halfway we had friends of hers that we stopped to get warm, and then everybody knew everybody. Nowadays you don't even know your neighbors. Everybody in town knew everybody. I mean, you did something wrong, everybody knew. Just a different world. I mean, now I don't even know my next door neighbors now where I live in Rochester now. Some of them I know, but I'm saying, used to be you knew everybody. Everybody watched out for each other.
Did your parents' house burn down? Did somebody mention that?
My dad passed away in '92, and my mother lived in the house that's we rebuilt. Yes, she had electrical fire, and I feel bad about that because I probably should have prevented that. My dad was always one who was an electrical guy, and they had a problem. She had a problem with the wall socket, and I didn't think anything of it. I just said, "Oh, okay." And she said, "Well, it isn't working quite right," and I just never paid much attention to it. But evidently, the fire started there. And what happened is, had a bad fire. The Hampton Falls came quickly. How they did it, I'll never know. But the place was really burning, and they went inside and sprayed it with a very fine mist of water and put the fire out. She didn't have insurance because my father always had insurance, but before he died, he said, "Don't need insurance, that's crazy." So she didn't have any fire insurance. So the town came together, fire department, the whole thing, put some money together and bought the materials. And myself, Steve Kuchty, Steve Sidlow, Mark, my brother, Harold Tanner. We worked for 6 months rebuilding that house. There was over in Southampton, the people, the lumberyard over there, gave us all the material. The people just donated and stuff because it was, my mother was well liked in town. Irene Vatcher, everybody loved her. Her name was actually Effie Irene. And she was diabetic, legally blind, but she lived in that house by herself. What happened towards the end of her life is we all spent, at nighttime, we'd take turns, each one, 1 or 2 days a week, one of the kids would go stay with her at night so she'd have somebody there. But they rebuilt that house. We all did it together, and it happened 2 days before 9/11. So we were tearing the thing apart and getting ready when the tragedy in New York happened. And Carol, my sister, came running down. You won't believe this. Somebody flew into the Trade Center. So I remember that well. It's kind of, you know where you were when certain things happen. Like when Kennedy died, you know exactly where you were when he got shot. Yes, the town, I'll always love Hampton Falls because, excuse me if I get emotional, for what they did for my mother. Unbelievable. Just unbelievable. Hampton Falls is a wonderful town. Good people. Sorry.
Thank you so much, Paul. This is great.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Well, it's my pleasure. I mean, this is great.
Well, we interviewed Carolyn